The opposite of fear is not safety. The opposite of fear is love. Fear is just one of the things that tears life apart. Just about the time you and I think we've got it all together, some unexpected event comes along and suddenly life becomes fragmented, disconnected, and disoriented.
Hi again, everybody. This is Heartbeat, the podcast, featuring insight and teaching from the more than 50 years of work done by Landon Saunders. On today's episode, Landon touches on 4 topics that many wrestle with on a regular basis, and in the process, provides some practical ideas about how we might address these issues. To begin with, what we do when it seems like life is coming apart at the seams.
Let me tell you about Dan Reeves. Dan's a tall, good-looking, red-haired fellow who's currently in school to become a surgeon. Being a student, he's not exactly rolling in money, so every little added expense makes a big difference. A few weeks ago, Dan came in from a hard day's work, found his apartment had been burglarized. Now, the thieves didn't do much damage, but they did take some items of value. A few days later, Dan took his car in to have the oil changed, and when the job was done, he drove off and shortly discovered the mechanic had drained the old oil but had forgotten to put in the new. A new engine, $2,000, and the service station doesn't want to pay for the damage. Well, a few days after he got the new engine in his car, he was driving along when suddenly the car beside him swerved, and now he has a badly dented front fender. Dan walks around these days just shaking his head. Apartment broken into, $2,000, new engine, and now a crumpled fender. What will happen next? If Dan told you that story, what would you say? Tough luck, Dan. Well, that kind of sympathy he could do without. Someone else counsels, sue them. I'd sue them all. That might be one answer, but even if he did, money's only part of the damage. How can money make up for the loss of time and the discouragement to his spirit? Somebody else says, cheer up, things could be worse. Well, he did that twice, and sure enough, things got worse. You may be saying, well, I wish my troubles could be solved with a new engine and a new fender. I've got real problems, cancer, or lost my job, my brother just died, just flunked out of school, or I'm an alcoholic. These are big problems. How do you handle it when your life comes apart at the seams? Statistics say that most people pray when things get rough. But to whom and for what? Praying for a dead brother to come back to life really won't do much good, except perhaps to help you feel better. And when that wears off, the reality of a dead brother is still there. The same's true with cancer, same with a divorce. Prayer has a place, but prayer is not an Aladdin's lamp to give you 3 wishes a day. For your life to hold together, you need some glue. Dan has his life glued together. And you too need a cohesive element to flow between the parts of your life and bind it all together. But what's that glue? I can't tell you in a word or two, but I can point you to an answer. The teacher was one who had it all together. He loved deeply, cared deeply, but when the disappointments and heartaches came, he was able to handle them. And by that I don't mean he just got by or copped out or escaped. I mean he was on top of things. All of us have heard the sound of breaking glass, the sound of breaking and entering. You know that's one of the most frightening sounds of life, to know that a burglar is taking over your property, your sense of well-being, perhaps even your life. That's an experience never to be forgotten. Fear strikes in many forms. Driving down a dark highway with ice on the road and snow falling so you can hardly see, that's a time of fear. Walking the streets in an unfamiliar city carries with it an element of fear. Some people fear heights, others closed places or animals or hospitals or airplanes. Those fears are nothing to laugh at. They're real to the people who have them. Undoubtedly, there are certain times and places when you experience fear. If so, you know that nobody, not even a trusted friend or a professional, can speak a few words and your fear will forever vanish. You and I know the easy answer, the quick solution, never touches the real problem. Let's think through this matter of fear. When you were a child and you were awakened by something that went bump in the night, who did you call out for? Policeman? The sheriff? Why, no, you called out for a parent. And once the parent arrived, everything was fine. Now that says to me that the answer to fear is not increased security alone. When the child cries out at night, his parents could call 1,000 policemen to surround the house, but that wouldn't comfort the child until he took his daddy by the neck and hugged him. It's not simply better security that takes away fear. It's a sense of being loved that takes away fear. Older people often are afraid of being alone at night. They listen to the creaks and the groans, the sounds of the house, and it all worries them. But what happens when 8-year-old granddaughter comes over to spend the night with grandmother? Grandmother sleeps like a baby. Obviously, the 8-year-old isn't there to protect her. The only contribution she can make is love and trust, and with that, grandmother is secure. The opposite of fear is not safety. The opposite of fear is love. Do you ever think back to your days in junior high school? When I think of what we put our teachers through, I'm amazed they survived. Every junior high school teacher could write a book on the excuses he's heard from his students. I don't have my term paper today because I was sick last night. Well, that's too bad, but he's known about it for 3 months. I had my homework all ready last night and the cat tore it up. Or, I didn't get that book read because I had to go to my grandmother's funeral. Oh, really? That's the 4th grandmother he's lost this month. Probably the worst thing about excuses is that the people who make them sometimes don't grow out of them ever. The same excuses can be heard at work and staff meetings. Perhaps a little more sophisticated is the only difference. Such as, we tried that before. It costs too much. Our place is too small. We're not ready for that yet. Let's form a committee. The secretaries won't like it. Let's sleep on it. See what I mean? Same sort of thinking, just a little more refined. Why do people make excuses? Maybe to cover up their neglect or their laziness, or to make themselves look better. Usually when someone makes an excuse, he does so out of fear of failure, or he may be afraid he won't do the job well enough. He may fear somebody won't like what he does, or somebody else would do it better, and so he doesn't do anything at all except make excuses. Do you know what excuse makers are really saying? They're really saying that they have a low opinion of themselves. Does that surprise you? It makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if a person really felt good about him or herself, he or she wouldn't be afraid of failure. They wouldn't be afraid to face the fact that they might not do the job as well or as fast as somebody else. And if they didn't have all those fears, they wouldn't have to make the excuses. And so the problem is not excuses. The problem is not even the fear of the unknown. The problem really is the person's opinion of him or herself. If a person feels good about himself, he wouldn't mind a challenge. He wouldn't mind trying a new idea or venturing into a new project. Why? Because if he tries and fails, it won't be the end of the world. He can brush it off and go on unscathed because he feels he's an okay person to begin with. All of which brings up a question. How do you feel about yourself? Are you comfortable enough with yourself that you can take on a challenge, receive criticism, maybe even fail, and still smile through it all? Well, his academic scores are heavenly and his personal qualifications are divine, but even God didn't make it into Princeton University. Along with the 10,000 applications received at Princeton's admissions office, one was turned in recently signed God. The signature was in Hebrew lettering. Princeton officials aren't saying if they know who the prankster was, but it looked convincing. For birth date, it said simply BC. Under sex, both male and female were underlined. For ethnic origins, all nationalities were checked. The candidate said he had made a perfect score in the SAT test, except for the questions about evolution and relativity. There, he disputes the answers of biologists and Einstein. Princeton's admissions director summed it up by saying, "It's a clever ruse." Well, it must have given some college students a great deal of pleasure to create it. Life in the dormitory obviously got a little dull, and this provided them with a nice, quiet diversion. When life gets dull for you, what do? Pull a prank? Go for a night on the town? Change jobs? Maybe you take a trip or work on a favorite hobby. What do you do? When I have a slow time, maybe an evening that I don't especially have anything pressing, I've begun an interesting diversion. Now, it sounds simple, but you'd be amazed how rewarding it is. I spend that evening thinking through an idea. Now, all of us have ideas that float in and out of our minds every day. But when one comes through that seems to hold a little promise, I log it away to think through later. Then, when I have time for a little diversion, I get out the idea and I look at it from every angle. Now, I haven't always done that. Something would occur to me and I'd raise a sleepy eyelid, look the idea over superficially, and dismiss it with one of my 2 favorite excuses: that's too much work, or I've tried that before. But then it occurred to me that I'm not paying attention to myself. After all, everything done by human beings, all our accomplishments, progress, culture, science, all of it began with an idea that floated into somebody's mind. And so I started treating those ideas with respect. I've begun to examine them, to think them through, and when I find a good one, I act on it, and that has changed my life. In fact, it's meant so much to me, I'd like to get you started in thinking through some key ideas. These ideas have to do with you, your schedule, your purpose in life, your friends, and your family. 5 ideas.
These 5 ideas are simple but powerful. If you'd like your complimentary copy, simply visit the show page for This Is Heartbeat, the podcast, and look for the link to download 5 ideas. If you have any difficulty finding the link, just let us know. We'll be sure and get you a copy. Thanks again for joining us for today's episode. We hope you'll take time to rate and review the podcast if you enjoy it. This helps others who are looking for the same kind of material. And until next time, this is Heartbeat, the podcast.